Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm John Guy, Curator for the Arts of South and Southeast Asia. I thank you all for being here tonight on the occasion of the annual Distinguished Lecture on the Arts of South Asia. I'm delighted, really. This is the 17th year now we've been running these lectures. It's a firmly established part of the Asia Week program in New York. Tonight's lecture is really tailored to complement our current exhibition, Household Gods, Hindu Devotional Prints, 1860 to 1930, showing up on our third floor of the South Asian galleries, which I hope many of you will find time to see. Our recently formed collection of some 120 Indian lithographs and chromolithographs is showing in 4 rotations over the next year. I should stress, to see the initial rotation, you'll need to see it before May. After that, we swing into rotation number 2. I'm pleased to report in the few weeks that we've been open, some 21,000 visitors have viewed the exhibition, a significant percentage of whom are college students and young adults. And these demographics matter to us and bode well, I think, for the future. I want to thank my colleagues in the Education Department, Francesca and Marianne, who work closely with us in the Asian Art Department, making this event happen each year. It's in these partnerships that make working at the Met so special. Other sorts of partnerships are important too, as with the collaborations we pursue with colleagues beyond the museum's walls. Tonight's speaker, Richard Davis, Research Professor of Religions at Bard College, is one such example, a pioneering authority of an undervalued subject whose good counsel we have sought in building this collection, along with other notable friends who are with us in the audience this evening. But before we call Professor Davis to the podium, may I invite the Consul General of India here in New York, Ambassador Binaya Pradhan, to make some opening remarks. Thank you, Ambassador.
Namaskar, very good evening. Let me express my sincere thanks to our good friend, Mr. John Guy, and the Met for organizing this lecture every year. And also my sincere thanks to Professor Davis, who is, of course, a household name back home, for his work on India for the last 45 years. I think the first time he visited India was 1981. So 45 years he has been going to India. But let me express my sincere thanks to this distinguished audience. I was imagining I'll be seeing kind of members of Indian diaspora. I'm really, really thankful to see such a very diverse gathering here. It shows the richness of the audience here, also shows the richness of the New York City in cultural milieu. I grew up in eastern part of India in a state called Odisha, which is adjacent to Calcutta. But Calcutta at that point of time was the capital of colonial India. It remained the capital till 1911. And when I was growing up, I remember seeing the paintings, the pictures of idols, which would largely come from Calcutta. And they would be printed there. So you can imagine that a place which was the political capital, which was a trade center, which was kind of the richest city at that point of time of entire South Asia. And you also had the cultural and scientific renaissance happening in India in that city. So it was kind of a confluence of everything happening in Calcutta. And of course, I remember seeing the pictures of Lord Krishna. Some of them, like my good friend Anu Sehgal was mentioning, some of them are looking like Victorian stamp is there on Lord Krishna. So I'm sure all of you will get a chance to see the exhibits. We'll see how it has a lasting influence. I think, like Professor Davis said, it's bringing the past together with the present. But we are all really, really thankful to the Met and Mr. John Guy for organizing this. Last time when you did the Indian Sky, I remember that had a strong resonance in the city and also back home. I'm really thankful for you doing it again and again. Thank you so much. And let me now invite Professor Richard Davis to give his lecture.
So, welcome to everybody. So I want to thank the Consul General Binaya Pradhan for that generous and personalized introduction, and John Guy for inviting me here, and also for inviting me at a time when this new show has just gone up. I'd also like to thank Francesca and the other staff, whose names I've now forgotten, for helping organize this and bring this into being. So, the name of this talk is Gods at the Gate of Modernity, Religious Art in Colonial India. I saw at the East Asia galleries that this is the year of the horse, but I'd like to suggest in this talk that here in South and Southeast Asia we declare this also the year of the religious god print, or maybe the year of the peacock, in honor here of Skanda's beautifully colored mount on the right. These have been generally termed calendar prints or bazaar art, or the term I prefer, god prints, a direct translation of the Tamil term samipadam. And for a long time, these mass-produced prints, most often featuring Hindu gods in bright colors, were dismissed by scholars as cheap, garish kitsch. As mechanically produced, ephemeral prints, they were considered unworthy of attention, collection, or preservation. But this winter, I realize this is the first day of spring, so this winter and now in the spring, 2 exhibitions have opened at 2 major American universal museums, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and the museum we are right now in, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And these 2 museums give this humble but ubiquitous genre of 2-dimensional visual art from South Asia a genealogy, a history, and an artistic legacy in the larger world of art. And I hope everyone here will have a chance to view both of these exhibitions. And as John has explained, the Metropolitan exhibition features a rotating display. So I hope that you will all be able to get here at least 4 times to see the exhibition here. So my task here is to sketch out a little of the history of this form of commercial religious art. And my title promises to talk about colonial Calcutta, and I will, I promise. But first I'd like to trace a path back from the present and talk about my own path of encounter with God print. So this is an autobiographical kind of a back to the future, or maybe forward to the past, I'm not sure, but it's about me. So I had already studied Indian religious history and art history when I first went to India in 1981. And studying Indian art for me in Chicago in those days mainly involved looking at black and white photos and slides and then visiting American museums. And that didn't prepare me for the dazzling world of color I would encounter in India. For me, it was like when I arrived in India, it was like leaving black and white Kansas or Chicago, which we used to call the Gray City, and arriving in the land of Oz. Just one example, the Chola bronzes that I had studied in my art history class showed up not in pristine, unadorned exhibition form, as they are displayed upstairs in the South Asia galleries, but covered over in flower garlands and jewelry, and paraded around the streets of Madurai in processions. Among the most colorful and ubiquitous features of this new landscape, this new color landscape, were the God prints that I began to notice in shops, in homes, on buses, the auto rickshaws. These were really intriguing to me. Where did they come from? What were they doing? I discovered, first, a kiosk bookshop inside the great Meenakshi temple in Madurai that sold them. And the proprietor there was very happy to indulge my rudimentary Tamil in discussing the gods and their iconographies in these god prints, which I then purchased. I realized even then that these prints could be valuable for teaching American students about the deities of Hinduism, not just, and they were cheap, I should say, even on a graduate student budget. These colorful images, in fact, showed us what the Hindu gods look like, not just in the medieval past, but also now. I began to collect them, and over the years, I tracked them first to these framing shops, where you could purchase a print and then have it framed while you wait. And I want to point out that in the exhibition upstairs, and in this slide, I have a pointer here, don't I? This one. The frame print of Arjuna and Krishna on the battlefield is exactly the kind of framed print that one would have acquired at such a shop. I then traced these prints back to the large wholesale shops like J.B. Khanna in Chennai and the Brijbasi and Subhash firms in Delhi, where it was possible to buy large numbers of prints in large formats for incredibly low prices. I think it was less than 5 cents a print for large 16 by 20 color prints. And so by buying them so inexpensively, I could use them in class. I could hand them out to students so that they could decorate their dormitories. And eventually, I had students do research on the prints and the artists and curate little exhibitions of these prints at the Student Center at Bard, temporarily turning one room there into what I called Devaloka. My initial focus was entirely on contemporary prints, those produced and printed in the late 20th century. But did these god prints have a history? Where do they come from? How did they get to be so common? When I asked knowledgeable people in India this, they said, oh, well, this genre comes from Ravi Varma, the so-called father of Indian calendar art. So Ravi Varma was from an aristocratic family in Kerala, and he became, in the second half of the 19th century, a highly successful oil painter, specializing in portraits of elite patrons, as well as scenes from the Indian epics. And in 1894, he and his brother set up a new publishing firm in Maharashtra near Bombay to reproduce his religious images for a broader audience. And they brought the best modern available religious lithographic equipment from Germany, and also they brought the German printer, I'm having trouble with the lights here, Fritz Schleicher, to help with the techniques involved in transferring Ravi Varma painted images onto stone and then onto paper. Now, Ravi Varma's prints were enormously successful, but his management of the company was not. And by 1899, 5 years, the brothers were deeply in debt. In 1901, they sold the business to the German technician they had brought to India, and the firm stayed in business for many years until 1972 as the Ravi Varma Press, but without Ravi Varma. Now, Ravi Varma's original designs, which the Ravi Varma Press continued to print, such as these. Whoa, how did we get there? Let's go back. Here we are. Ravi Varma's original designs, such as the two that you see on the upper register, have led a long life, not only as framed devotional prints but also repurposed as advertisements. So we see Skanda on his peacock in the upper right, repurposed into advertisement for snuff, which, I don't know if Skanda would approve. And likewise, was it Vishnu over there? A calendar that is also advertising Sunlight soap. So how did they get the name Calendar Prints? Oh, that's why they got the name Calendar Prints. So Ravi Varma was certainly an enormously influential artist in this particular genre. And not only in terms of his own prints, but also because his original designs led a long life as models or prototypes that other subsequent God poster artists have adapted and modified in their own designs. So here we see Ravi Varma's original Sarasvati, and then a couple of more recent designs of Sarasvati, in which the artists Kandaya Raju and Subaya have taken the prototype but modified it in particular ways in accord with their own aesthetic and religious purposes. So Ravi Varma's prints then set a kind of a template for later artists. Yeah. It's just great to see these pictures so big. There was not a great deal of scholarship on these prints or this industry in the 20th century. There had been a few valuable studies by Tapti Tagore-Taguha and Partha Mitter, and there were articles, very fine articles by Stephen Inglis and H. Daniel Smith. But in the mid-2000s, two new books appeared that really changed and broadened my views of these prints. The first was Chris Pinney's book, Photos of the Gods, which came out in 2004, and then the second, Kadri Jain's book in 2007, Gods in the Bazaar. And both of these began to fill in both the sort of commercial economy of the God print industry and also the history of this genre of mechanically produced devotional religious art. Pinney's book in particular provided a new history of the genre that reached back before Ravi Varma to presses in 19th century Maharashtra and especially Calcutta. Soon after these books appeared, I met two print collectors and dealers, Marc Barron and Elise Boissonté, who are here tonight, who were also exploring early examples of this genre. I first saw their collecting efforts in a show at the Davis Museum at Wellesley College in 2010, and then I went to meet them at their apartment in New York City. And as they collected and studied older God prints, Barron and Boissonté became more and more focused on locating and preserving the earliest rare prints from Calcutta. And so some of the prints that you will see upstairs come from their collection. Okay. So I would like to, now I've been talking about myself and about the sort of contemporary situation, but we're going to move from very modern print of Sarasvati. We're going to follow the line, the dancing line of the green dot backwards in time through other important artists, B.G. Sharma of the 1960s, Brij Basi and Sons of the 1930s, back through Ravi Varma, back to the Calcutta Art Studio, and then to Shu Gobind Lal back in the 1870s. So following this trail of Sarasvati back from contemporary prints to colonial Calcutta, I'd like to touch briefly on three main topics, and the first one is new modern technologies. The second is the regional Bengali iconography. And the third is the question of reception, devotional or venerative reception. But where do we begin? A good starting point, I think, will be the place where the goddess Sati's toes fell to earth, according to legend, and where an important temple grew up. In 19th century Calcutta, this sacred site along the river on the outskirts of town, known as Kalighat, became an important popular destination for worshipers, pilgrims, and tourists. And in this temple sanctum, a distinctive form of Kali appeared as the central icon. And you can see her, I'll get the pointer here, in this sort of pastiche photograph. As the popularity of Kalighat Temple grew, rural artisans, often from the potter class, migrated into the neighborhood and set up shops. And evidently, visiting pilgrims were interested in purchasing devotional souvenirs, and the artisans sought to meet that new religious consumer market. The Kalighat artists developed working methods and a new aesthetic style allowing for rapid production. They did quick sketches, they did minimal backgrounds, they eliminated or omitted non-essential details. So it's a quick way of painting. And they also kept costs down by using factory-made paints on mill-made paper. The earliest themes of Kalighat paintings were the Hindu gods, appropriately, but the artists also subsequently branched out into secular themes. Most common of all was the goddess Kali as worshipped in the nearby temple. She's a disorienting figure, de-anthropomorphized, not quite human. She has a preponderant head with two large eyes and a third vertical eye. Whoa, don't go away. Come back. It's sticking here. Where am I? Third vertical eye in her forehead and a bright, lolling tongue. And she often wears a garland of severed heads. She has 4 tiny arms holding, on the right, a cleaver and a severed head, but also giving mudras, hand gestures conveying security and generosity on her left. So this goddess is ferocious, but also strangely reassuring to her devotees. Now we can go. So Kalighat painters were not the only ones to produce prints to meet this demand. Old and new methods of mechanical reproduction were also employed. These technologies included woodblock printing, electrotyping, lithography, and chromolithography. And the Kalighat artists themselves were not print purists, or paint purists, I should say. The anonymous Kalighat painter who made Devi Kali on the left also used lithography to produce the initial outline, which he then painted over. The one on the right is a woodblock print, or relief print, so woodblock printing in colonial Calcutta developed out of the small book printing industry that was established in another neighborhood of colonial Calcutta, Batala. And bookmakers there produced inexpensive almanacs, religious books, and educational materials, and they used woodblock printing to manufacture the illustrations for these books. But they discovered that there was also a market for the illustrations separate from the books themselves. People wanted to buy just the prints. And the printers could produce runs of images of up to 100 prints from a single block and compete actually very successfully in price, with the one-off paintings of the Kalighat artists. And they kept costs down even further by using very inexpensive paper, which is why, along with the damp, warm climate of Calcutta, that these once mechanically produced and probably quite common 19th century woodblock prints are now very rare. So Nrityalalal Dutta, a mid-19th century Batala printer, started with a woodblock print, and then he added some nice red detailing to the hand block print on the right. The 1870s and 1880s were a rich period in Calcutta printing, with many small firms experimenting with new modern technologies and designs. And during these decades, several firms began to adopt the more complex method of chromolithography, which had been first developed in France in the early 19th century. Chromolithographic print images are printed using multiple limestone blocks. This allows vivid and rich color and also allows for almost unlimited reproduction of the resulting prints. So on the right, we see one example from the Chori Bagan Art Studio, one of the new firms founded in this period, specializing in printmaking using chromolithographic methods. The Chori Bagan print follows earlier models closely, but shows greater concern for detail and for the colorful clarity of Kali's adornments. Her severed head, for instance, on the very bottom right, is given a much more lifelike presence. And the artist here has also placed Kali in a new auspicious setting, a framing that seems to locate Kalighat Kali not in a temple, but on a theater stage. Theater was very popular in late 19th century Calcutta. And also, the printer has highlighted her divine presence against a yellow background. The economies of scale in mechanical reproduction allowed chromolithographic prints to compete successfully with Kalighat paintings and woodblock prints. They combined a richness of color and detail that these other media could not match, and yet were still affordable for the urban middle classes of colonial Calcutta. And by the 1890s, the chromolithographic images were putting the painters of Kalighat out of business. Over in Maharashtra, Ravi Varma was taking note of this development in Bengal. Okay, so enough Kali. I will only note that the particular design of Kalighat Kali seems to have remained largely distinctive to Bengal. And so when Ravi Varma did his version of Kali, he showed her on the left in a much more anthropomorphic form. And most subsequent print artists in India have followed Ravi Varma's model. She remains here a very challenging goddess, but not quite so in your face. From Ravi Varma's time on, god prints have generally sought to reach a pan-Indian audience. Ravi Varma was very conscious of trying in this period of the sort of the beginning of the rise of Indian nationalism to reach a pan-Indian audience. But the Calcutta prints reflected a more regional divine pantheon. Goddesses feature prominently, not just Kali, but a regionally distinctive group called the 10 Mahavidyas, a kind of a tantric grouping. And Durga also plays a big role, as we'll see in a minute. So the Shakta religious tradition centered on worship of goddesses or the goddess, that is, the divine in feminine form, was particularly strong in colonial Bengal. And there was a nationalist dimension to this colonial-era Bengali focus on the goddess, which Chris Pinney writes about, certainly, and Sumati Ramaswamy has also subsequently written about goddesses in the nation. Colonial printmakers in Calcutta also favored images of Krishna. And Krishna has been a favorite subject throughout the history of God prints. I think in my informal survey, I have more Krishna prints than any other deity. Krishna appears in several of the most sublime, if I can use that word, and popular Brijbasi prints of the 1930s, done by the Natadvara artist Narottam Narayan Sharma. And also, Krishna appears in his visionary identity of Vishvarupa as he appears to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, such as in this version, a very influential version from the 1930s by the South Indian artist Tirumal Rao. And I can't resist including this. I thought it would get a laugh. This was the first God poster I ever saw as a high school student in Ohio on this classic rock and roll cover. And there's an interesting story to this, but the art director has mashed two prints by the popular 1960s artist B.G. Sharma, which I managed to track down, with a headshot photo of Jimi Hendrix and his group. And back in those days, many of us thought that Hendrix was a kind of a guitar god, so it was very fitting. I'd like to look at one Krishna theme that I believe is distinctive to Bengal. This is called Krishna Kali, or Krishna taking on the form of Kali. So we're not leaving Kali behind after all. The print was issued by the Calcutta Art Studio, a firm founded in 1878 by 5 artists who had been affiliated with the government school of art in Calcutta. Now, the government school had been established under the British colonial administration in 1864 to train Indian youth to, and I quote, to train them to produce industrial art based on scientific methods, which meant in those days European aesthetic conventions of, quote, realism. And this was, of course, before the time that various European modernisms exploded those conventions. The school drew many of its students from the urban educated classes of Calcutta. And these gentleman artists came from a different social strata than the earlier rural artisan communities of Kaligat and Batala. The art school trained artists who founded the Calcutta Art Studio employed their training in European scientific methods and probably learned chromolithography at the school for the depiction of Indian religious themes with wondrous results. Chris Pinney calls this effect xenoreal. Xenoreal, as in xenophilic or xenophobic. Colonial authorized realism that circulated outside its framework of origination, namely works of Hindu deities, but done in using European techniques of realistic art. So here we see Hindu deities and figures in Black Forest-like settings, wearing the voluminous robes appropriate to a chilly European climate. The bodies of the gods are rendered with anatomical realism, but they retain the iconographic features that most Indian audiences expected: additional arms, extraordinary complexions, animal vehicles, iconic implements. So in this picture, Krishna Kali, the setting is a forest clearing with a lake and hills in the background. And in the foreground, a young woman with crimson head covering kneels before a standing figure and seems to be offering worship. 7 other women surround these 2 central figures. In the upper right, and now I need to use this guy. In the upper right, a smaller male figure with pointing finger enters the scene. Let's get a detail. Yeah. At the center of the composition is a rather puzzling figure with dark blue complexion, a hanging red tongue, 4 arms, a cleaver, and a severed head. The figure wears a necklace of detached heads, right? So is this Kali? But the figure is male, wears a peacock feather, and the yellow dhoti characteristic of Krishna. Well, this is not a puzzle to somebody who knows the story. The female figure is Radha, who in this version is married to a man named Ayan Ghosh, and who is the figure, again, entering here. And he is furious because Radha has been 2-timing him with her lover Krishna. And when she sees her husband approaching, she implores Krishna to come up with some stratagem to fool him. So Krishna obliges by instantly transforming himself into Kali, knowing that Ayan Ghosh was a devotee of the goddess. This story, I think, is distinctive to Bengali culture. I can be corrected, but I think that's the case. And it made an ecumenical point, linking the 2 principal schools of Bengali Hinduism in colonial times, namely Shakta worship of the goddess and Vaishnava devotion to Krishna. Kaligat artists had also rendered the theme, and you can compare the difference in treatment. The Kaligat painter has, on the right, has focused just on the 3 principal figures with no background. So it allows a kind of a visual concentration on the divine figure, but it leaves the viewer to construct the larger narrative. A question: what did colonial era Calcutta consumers want with the prints they purchased? How did they intend to use them? Prints could be hung on walls, they could be framed, they could be enshrined, they could be used for domestic devotional practices. And so I'd like to look at one last type in which the link between the image and devotional practice is a little bit clearer. And this is the type that I'll call the Durga Puja shrine image. And here it's in a very early relief print that is in the Wellcome collection in London. Nowadays, Durga Puja is an enormous public event in Calcutta. Neighborhood groups construct temporary shrines of the goddess Durga following a long-standing iconographic format, but also, at times, adapting it to contemporary issues. So this one was done in 2020 at the height of the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. And so the artists here in this bundle have added a series of figures. I don't know if you can see them. A policeman instructing people on how to put masks on, nurses and doctors treating patients who have come down with COVID. So this is a contemporary art form that also is responsive to contemporary issues. These public shrines date back about a century to the 1920s. Earlier, in the 19th century, affluent landlords could have artisans come into their homes and construct elaborate domestic shrines. But for everyday Bengalis, Kalighat painters and lithoprinters created two-dimensional images. Durga Puja images always feature Durga as the central figure, and she is shown here in her warrior identity as the slayer of the demon Mahishasura. So here's Mr. Mahishasura. He's lost his buffalo head. But they also celebrate Durga as a mother goddess in her identity as Uma, with four other divine figures considered to be her children. So we see Lakshmi and Saraswati on her, near her, and then in the lower part of the image, Ganesha and Skanda here on his peacock. All of them considered to be the children of the goddess Uma, who is also Durga. Now, the artists here have followed this basic format, and then they've employed their distinctive print technologies with their own artistic flexibility. So both of these artists have placed the figures in a two-dimensional shrine frame, right, with overarching, what's it called, a chala, an elaborate ornamental detailing there. And they have clearly indicated the shrine-like nature of their compositions by including the feet or the base. So you can see that this is actually a shrine because here it has feet, and likewise this has these little lion's feet down here. So these are shrines. The chromolithographic printers of Chori Bagan Studio have treated the deities as fleshy living beings, a bit like the porcelain doll-like figures that might have been used in three-dimensional shrines. Both have produced engaging, complex, two-dimensional replications of shrines that might have been built in the homes of landlords. I like to call these temples in a frame, right? They depict a shrine setting within a print that can itself be framed and used as a shrine devotionally. So I'd like to conclude by returning to one last depiction of Kalighat Kali. You can see that I like Kali. This one, a mid-20th century chromolithograph by H. Chunder, about whom not much is known, actually, on this one here. So here we see the full temple in a frame effect, right? The artist has placed a recognizable image of Kalighat Kali in a shrine setting, and he has also placed two worshipers in the lower foreground, shown in the act of venerating the deity who dominates the scene. So it is an image both of worship and for worship. Over their 150-year history, God prints have been produced and used as venerative art. That's a term that I borrow from the philosopher Nicholas Wolterstorff. That is, works of art whose first intention is to be venerated by others within a religious framework of values. Next, yeah. So this museum is filled with objects, often beautifully made objects, whose original aim was not to be in museums, of course, but was venerative, including the remarkable Chola bronze sculptures upstairs. These and other former objects of devotion have been resituated in modern secular institutions of art for our aesthetic appreciation. No one expects anyone to be putting flowers on the Chola bronzes upstairs. Happened once, I think, but not common. The colonial era Calcutta prints we have looked at stand at the beginning of a new genre of mass-produced religious prints or venerative art that has had an enormous impact on the religious landscape of modern India. They've become so ubiquitous that we often fail to register their history, their artistry, and their religious significance. Well, so let me. This is what it looks like upstairs. I encourage everybody to go up there and keep in mind that you have to go 3 more times after that. So now we're going to conclude. And to conclude, I'd like to quote H. Daniel Smith, who was one of the first scholars to study this genre seriously, writing in 1995. He said, "As a popular art genre, the poster gods have fostered a democratic devotionalism, a populist piety of extraordinary proportions in the present age." So by this he meant that Indian consumers have been able to create their own pantheons of gods through using this readily accessible and inexpensive form of art. They are indeed household gods, available to all for domestic veneration or even just colorful decoration. And so, in the year of Skanda's peacock, we can celebrate the entry of these god prints into the world of art at the Museum of Modern Art, joining the Chola bronzes and other venerative works of art from South Asia and beyond. Thank you.